Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is bound by flame. This is a game by a company called Spiders. They previously released a game called Mars Warlocks, which kind of popped out of nowhere, and it had its moments, but it was fundamentally flawed in many, many respects. Which is, strangely enough, how I would actually describe Bound by Flame, although I do believe it's a more competent effort. It's published by Focus Home Interactive. They put a lot of different games out on the market. They're currently working with people like Cyanide for Blood Bowl. Actually got their claws in a couple of 40k games. The forthcoming first-person shooter, Deathwing, which I really, really hope is good, is also being published by them. Very much a mixed bag from Focus, but some of these mid-range publishers will publish some good stuff, they'll publish some tat, it's just the way that it kind of goes. And this is one of those games that almost looks like it could be AAA, but you can tell why it's not AAA once you start to dig into the nitty-gritty of the game design. It's a fantasy RPG, primarily an action RPG played from the third person. And we will have a look at it and see what's going on with it, and I'll explain everything so far. This First Impressions is quite far into the game, because I do genuinely believe you can't give a first impressions of an RPG without going pretty far in. They tend to drag their content out, they tend to be very slow with the start, they introduce mechanics later into the game that can really change things around. However, I've put about, I would say, 6 or 7 hours into it. Steam claims 12, I don't believe that in any way, it's counting all tab time. But yeah, 6 or 7 hours before my first impressions, which I believe got me to Chapter 3. The game is supposedly not very long, as I've seen from other reviews. It can be beaten in about 12 hours, maybe 15, depending on how many side quests you do and how much of it you replay. Alright, let's start by having a look at the video options, shall we? Quite a few. Yeah, even a field of view slider, which is always nice to see, and even on a third-person game. You don't necessarily need it, but it's nice to be able to get a little bit of extra vision, and that actually matters in the combat quite a lot, since enemies can come from behind, and, well, you will hate yourself if you let them. So, have it pretty high. Shadows, your screen space ambient occlusion. FXAA is the only available anti-aliasing, which for a lot of people is going to suck. For those who don't know, FXAA is a very, very approximate, but also kind of a low-impact version of anti-aliasing. So it works on a lot of systems, and it doesn't really hit your frame rate too much, but it's also not very good, yeah? It's very inaccurate. So you could turn off FXAA and inject something a little bit harsher, a little bit more accurate, but also a much bigger hit on your system, and there's various ways to do that, so do consider that if you have the power to play with. You might not, though. Particle effects, texture quality high. Texture quality in this game is actually pretty good, as I will show you. Anisotropy, I believe it goes all the way up to 16. I've currently got it on 8. Let's throw it all the way up to Ultra, why not? Oh, it requires a game to be restarted? Okay, well, we're not doing that then. 8 will be fine for the time being. So, graphically, yeah, it does have the options that I think you would want. I would like to see different types of anti-aliasing available without having to inject them or force them via my graphics card software. So that's something to consider there. Outside of that, it's pretty much got what you would want, though. Alright, we'll go back here, and let's have a look at the audio options. Basically just your standard sliders for all 4 here. Nothing really out of the ordinary and as expected. Got your brightness options there as well, and here's the game options. Tutorials on and off, subtitles, and then you can move around the UI just a little bit if you so desire. I've got it on default for the time being, but it's nice to have that level of customization. And there are your controls. You can use either the pad or the keyboard and mouse. I played the entire game with the keyboard and mouse and had no problems with it whatsoever. And then, of course, you've got rebinding plus secondary options for a lot of it as well. And there's your mouse controls. Can't rebind the sodding controls for the controller, though. I've noticed this so much lately. It wasn't something I was previously looking for, but since I've played quite a few third-person games with a controller lately, I've noticed that lack of rebinding, and I was like, wow. Is that what console gamers deal with on a daily basis? And it's like, yeah, they do. And that sucks. That really should be something that should be fixed as far as I'm concerned. It's really strange. Okay, so that's the options there. Pretty much what you would expect. Nothing shines as being something that's missing and is obviously something that should be there. So, that's okay. Alright, we're going to jump into this. It's going to be fairly hard to avoid spoilers, because obviously I don't know what's coming. And there aren't that many side quests in the game, so expect some level of spoiler going into this. And if you're extremely sensitive about that, then I would just suggest not watching the video whatsoever, because it's hard to avoid spoilers in an RPG. Okay, let's jump in and see what's going on with it. To the Steps of Caralthas. And then we'll show you exactly what this game is all about when it loads eventually. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time. The loading times in between scenes are generally not that high, but loading into a level does take a little bit of time. Bear in mind, I do run on an SSD, so you might be saying, oh, 10 seconds? That's not much. Yeah, but that's 10 seconds on an SSD. You know, it's 20 plus on a regular hard drive. All right. Let's jump on down and get going. So this is your main character. He is referred to as Vulcan, despite whatever you might call him. And, well, the game is called Bound by Flame for a very good reason, because you got a bloody demon inside you. As to how much demon you've got inside you, well, that's kind of up to you. So before we advance into this and start to go into the inevitable combat that it's going to throw at us, let's have a look at some of the systems we've got here. So, your character can be equipped with a two-handed weapon, which could be a two-handed sword, kind of Claymore style. It could be a two-handed axe or a two-handed hammer. They all kind of do the same thing, and they use the same kind of attack animations, although they do generally have different stats, and it's possible to also use feat points to increase the effectiveness of a particular type. So if you want to specialize in two-handed axes or swords, you do have the ability to do that. You then have dual weapons, which is the so-called ranger style, which are generally dual daggers or, well, just dual daggers. And this is a much faster style, and it can be used to backstab, and that is actually used in the fairly basic stealth system that this game's got as well. They attack a lot faster, pretty good for single target, and you also gain a dodge move when you have these equipped. There's a skill tree for these, and I'll show you those in a minute. You then have a crossbow. This is a very, very basic system here, honestly, with this weapon. That actually looks like a crossbow from the future, which is really strange, but there you go. And all this is a weapon that buffs up your ability to shoot a bolt, and you have to build the bolts, you have to craft them. And it does damage. In this case, this one does poison damage, and that's kind of about it. It's not a weapon that you can regularly use. If you want to do a ranged style, the only way you can do that is with magic. You can't do that with crossbows. It's just a kind of backup weapon that allows you to fire a bolt off. Then we have our chest armor right here. You'll see that each piece of chest armor is individually modeled, and impressively enough is also altered further, and I'll show you how that happens in a minute. You've then got your gloves, boots, and a helmet. There you go. You'll notice that overall the texture quality on the items is actually pretty good, and there's some impressive high-resolution textures in this game, although not everywhere, I have to say. Most of them look pretty good, but there's a big degree of inconsistency as to what looks good and what doesn't. Yeah, I mean, that's a... You know, those are nicely modeled items, I've got to say. They all look pretty good, although some of them certainly look very Morrowindian or Skyrim or Dragon Age. I suppose, you know, generic fantasy tropes are going to apply regardless of what happens there. So, what else can you do? Well, you can actually socket your items, and this is where the crafting kind of gets pretty cool, because it also affects the way that your item looks. So if we click craft here, and I want to craft some spolders, I can go through these and I can add spolders. Now, each of these actually looks different, which is very impressive, and they have different effects as well. So if I want spolders of the Warlock, that's an interruption resist, but I want spolders of the Ember Knight, which is better. It's going to take some different materials. This takes refined metal and leather. This takes steel and tainted leather there. So I could absolutely add the spolders of the Ember Knight in there, or I could put the spolders of the Sorcerer in there. I would probably want to do that, because frankly, I'm very much a magic user at the moment, so we can now upgrade that. You can do this anywhere as long as you've got the materials, and you gather materials from pretty much everywhere. Tassets here I can alter as well. This game actually has quite a lot going for it in terms of your equipment customization with these different craftable slots, and you can just recycle whatever whenever you want here as well. Resistance to ice. Resistance to ice might be a good idea, actually. Yeah, let's put an ice gem in there, because we're in a kind of ice land. The antagonists are the Ice Lords. Probably ice. Just gonna guess at that. But yeah, I mean, equipment customization is actually pretty damn impressive. Although you will probably be confused by the fact that you can't go with a sword and board style. There's no shields in this game, which is really odd. You've got a parry, which you can only do... Well, you can actually do it with both weapons, but it's more effective with a two-hander. And then you've got your dual weapons and this and your magic, and that's it. So it's kind of deceptive. It looks like there's a lot of weapons available, but most of them kind of do the same thing, and the combat styles are very limited. So you've got your warrior style, which is your two-hander. You've got your ranger style, which is your dual wield. And then you've got pyromancy, which is not so much a style as it is something that you use with the other two. So, let's have a look at the skill system. We'll get into combat momentarily, but this is an RPG. You want to know about the nitty-gritty. And if you don't, then what the hell are you doing watching a video about an RPG? Good lord. So, you can manufacture different items, including exploding traps and crossbow bolts. I am like 6 or 7 hours into the game, and I have seen no recipes for anything else. Like, it's all of the crafting stuff you can do, you seem to just get, and I'm pretty sure there aren't any other traps. If there are, they're much later on in the game, which is very odd, considering you would think that placing traps would be a big deal in this game. And it is, they're very effective, and the combat is difficult, so it's usually a good idea to use them, but the only ones I've got are exploding traps. I think like freezing traps or snares or something. Unless I have missed something huge, there don't appear to be any of these. It may very well be that I've gone down the wrong skill tree and there might be something there, but yeah, you can make these pretty much whenever you want, even in the middle of combat, and you'll need to make a lot of these, trust me. You'll be wanting to try and get as much tainted blood as possible, because Lord knows you take a lot of damage. Alright, so that's that. Okay, let's have a look at the skill tree. So there are 3 of them. As you'll notice, I spent a lot of points in pyromancy. Getting to the top of any tree... Well, I've only just got to the top of the pyromancy tree at level 16, about 6 or 7 hours into the game. So the trees don't look that large, but because they have a lot of prerequisites, and they're also tiered, so you need to reach a certain amount of points to reach the next tier of expertise, it actually takes a lot longer than it looks. Yes, you can grab 3 points in a skill very quickly, and you can maybe even push up to amateur or maybe even expert, but you will note to get to that, you're going to need this as a prerequisite and this, and you're going to need both of these at level 3 to reach level 3 here. Now, when you click that, you'll see that each level of this is going to give you something else. So a chance of setting an enemy on fire with orb of fire or burning weapon. You then get burning enemies are more sensitive to fire, and then critical hits automatically set affected enemies on fire. So that's where it goes. And this is the master level skill that I've got here, Fire Spirit, which I can create, and it's going to fire fireballs everywhere. But in order to do that, I have sacrificed pretty much everything else. I got a couple of basic warrior talents, because you don't get the pyromancy tree until about an hour into the game. So you could just save your points, but it's usually good to throw this in here. Getting vitality, very, very useful. You can increase damage from heavy weapons and things like that. And a lot of this is locked, but you'll see exactly what it does. The maximum thing is a war cry, which is going to give you a lot of health regen and things like that. You can get rage, triggers rage mode every time an enemy is killed. More health regeneration, so this is going to make you tougher in general. And not having that is going to make you pretty flimsy, but even when you do level a lot of this stuff up, especially early on, you are flimsy anyway. You're going to take a lot of damage. And then you got your Ranger style, which I haven't put anything into whatsoever. I don't really play Ranger much. I just use my magic and my two-handers, which consists of a lot of different things. You've got a bullet time mode there. You have a lot of critical hit passives. Surprised enemies, that's through the stealth system, which just involves a very basic kind of sneak up and hit them before they notice you kind of thing. And you've got extra poisoning. You've got a bunch of riposte abilities and things like that. Which, oh, it's good. There's a decent amount of choices that you can make here, and maxing out all of them doesn't seem like it's feasible, considering the amount of time it took me to get pyromancy even to this level, and I'm still missing all of these talents here, which could be very useful. I have a feeling that it's going to take a lot more experience than is actually in the game in order to max out, so potentially there is some replayability here to go with a different style. Outside of that, you also have feats, which are unlocked in various different ways. Your exploration feats are generally a case of get the prerequisite, spend more points on the next, so and like that. But as you can see, there are also requirements to get that. Cast 30 fire spells in order to unlock this. This is particularly true with combat abilities. I can't get Slugger because I haven't killed 15 enemies with a hammer. So, the way that these skills work is a bit weird and kind of counterintuitive, because you don't really want to be using hammers. You'd prefer to be doing swashbuckling, for instance, because you start with a two-handed sword, so you unlock swashbuckler very quickly, but you don't get a two-handed axe or hammer until much later on in the game, by which point you're saying to yourself, oh, so I have to handicap myself with a lesser weapon in order to unlock these perks to use it. That is a very, very silly way of doing things. That's just daft. I don't want to kill 15 enemies with a dagger in order to unlock this. I certainly don't want to kill 15 enemies with a hammer when I know the two-handed sword I will be more effective, and as I said, the combat in this game is bloody difficult. So there you go. But yeah, those are your feats. That's what's going on with that. These are your attribute points. As you can see, they do not let you type my full name in, which is extremely disappointing. Makes sense, though. Yeah. There's nothing really out of the ordinary with these systems, I feel. There's a good amount of stats. It shows you exactly what's going on. Negative effects. It's detailed. Certainly very, very detailed. Alright, so there you go. I've shown you the stats system. I've pretty much shown you how the crafting works and everything like that. So, I don't have too many complaints about any of these things, other than the fact that there don't appear to be recipes for crafting, and you can craft kind of anywhere, and it just seems to automatically unlock all that stuff. I would like to be exploring the world in order to try and find recipes, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. And you can also only craft consumables and upgrades for existing items. You can't learn to actually craft things like weapons. Alright, let's rock and roll and show you what's going on with the combat, which no doubt we'll run into fairly shortly. You'll notice that the level design here is very maze-like. A lot of these levels are like this. If you're hoping for an open world game, this game is certainly not it. This is probably the most extreme example of a sort of maze-like style. It looks like we're going to be getting into a fight fairly shortly. Alright. No, cutscene. Never mind. We'll see where this one goes. Okay, I'm not sure that was entirely necessary, but never mind. Alright, let's try our fire spirit out. I actually haven't... Oh, let's not, because we got interrupted. Let's try our fire spirit out. There we go. Okay, so that's actually going to do something useful now. And I'm going to set my weapon on fire, and let's get into it. So, the combat system is, I suppose, a bit reminiscent of Witcher 2, although not hugely. In that you got your sort of light and heavy attacks. The heavy attack is mostly an AoE attack. You also have the ability to kick, which is going to force your enemy to stagger a little bit. Not too much, though, shockingly enough. They can actually still attack through a kick, but it is the only way that you can really break the shield guard without just smacking them to death. Now, you might be noticing I'm not doing a lot of damage here. Yeah, doing a lot of damage is actually kind of difficult. I am very much a pyromancer, but I've upgraded my fiery weapons to sort of ludicrous degrees. And even then, it takes swing after bloody swing to actually take these guys down. Now, there is a counter system, which involves pressing the parry button at the right time, and you'll notice there becomes a slight slowdown when that happens. I'm just going to skip through... Well, never mind. Not too much dialogue here at all, but never mind. So, you hit the parry button at the right time, and you are able to keep attacking instead of being interrupted. But here's the big problem with the combat system, What you would think is that a parry would kind of stagger the enemy, or even a kick would stagger the enemy and it would stop them doing their attack. It doesn't. It's actually very, very difficult to interrupt an enemy. There's a stat called interrupt. Let me show you that. So, if we go to my life reducer weapon here, ability to interrupt 12. I don't know what that means. Like, that doesn't appear to be a percentage or anything like that. So, maybe if I go to my stats, I might find out what my interrupt is all about. Ability to interrupt, again, 12. I don't know what that means at all. But in order to make them stagger and stop them from attacking, you have to interrupt them, and that is based entirely on that stat and nothing else. I mean, we are talking about the idea that I can throw fireballs at these guys and they will still attack through it. And I get interrupted almost all the time. There is a stat which is interrupt resistance, but even with fairly high tier gear, I don't seem to have too much of that going on. So what ends up happening is that an enemy will have no problem whatsoever in hitting you, even if you're attacking him, and they will do huge amounts of damage to you as a direct result of this, by the way. So it's worth bearing that in mind. I failed the backstab because I got spotted there. I'm just going to jump out of the way. Got poisoned anyway, which is always fun. I'll switch to my weapon that actually does something useful. Conjure my fire spirit. And then we can go in. You see how much damage I'm taking from the enemies? Yeah, it's pretty intense. Pretty intense. Oh, Jesus Christ. That was just a couple of arrows and I'm dead. Okay. Yep, sounds about right. Interrupting the enemy. This is basic stuff. Please don't tell me it's put me all the way back there. Kind of. Yes. Oh, great. Alright, so we're doing this fight again. Alright then. The ability to interrupt an enemy and stop their chain of attacks is kind of key, as far as I'm concerned, to any sort of third-person action game, whether it be a character action game, whether it be something like Batman, or God of War, or even a third-person action RPG. And this game seems to have forgotten that, and that is a key problem. Now, in this kind of situation, it's sort of fine. It's not really too big a deal. In situations with a lot of ranged enemies, it is absolutely going to be a big deal. In situations where there are a lot of fast-attacking enemies, it's a massive deal. Absolutely huge. Why is it a massive deal against fast-attacking enemies? Because guess what? They just keep attacking you, and you don't get the opportunity to hit them back, because they attack you so fast, and even doing a counter won't stagger the attacker. As I've kind of shown you previously, I'll try and do it again. See, up to. Well, kind of messed that up. Getting the timer right is difficult. You see, it didn't actually stagger him at all, and he blocked it, and then followed up. So, the only way I'm going to be able to stagger him in order to attack him is actually to kick him. Or, again, hit him with magic or critical hits. And he can, even if I kick him, he can still attack through that. I mean, I kicked him there and it didn't even do anything to his block. Now, against multiple fast-attacking enemies, you can be put in a situation where you can't move. You cannot. The only thing you can do is keep parrying. And that's it. You can't attack backwards through it because they will just keep going for you, and they're attacking so quickly, they'll go through your guard and they will murder your face. Which, if I was more into the warrior tree, that wouldn't be as much of a problem, I don't think, because I would have the extra toughness and life regeneration. But even then, especially early on when I went into the warrior tree, I was still having absolutely huge problems with that. It's a key flaw within the combat system, and I am kind of cheesing it by using a lot of magic, Because magic's pretty powerful, I've buffed it up a lot, I can kill a lot of guys with it, I don't have to fight too much, and even when I do fight, I can use my fiery weapon, which will at least make me a little bit more capable of doing a lot of damage, especially in area of effect, sort of big whirlwind swings. But there are certain combat scenarios where I just feel completely and totally useless. And speaking of useless, the comrades that you get, not great either. There are two that I would consider to be worthwhile. This is not one of them. This guy I'm actually being forced to use. I can't seem to get rid of him, which really sucks. I'd like to take Sybil or the sort of witch character that I've got, because the witch character has curses, which are very effective, and Sybil is a healer. So you can imagine that's going to be pretty useful. She's got some decent knockbacks and ranged lightning attacks as well, although neither of them really do a huge amount of damage one way or the other. I can't. I've got this guy, and you saw how fast he fell down earlier. He's bloody useless. Why did they send a prince with me to just get beaten up by the Deadwalkers? I have no idea. You can order your companions around, but again, that doesn't really do much. It just tells them, oh, do a little bit more of this, do a little bit more of that. And that's only relevant when they have multiple abilities. Outside of that, you can just say, be defensive. Don't be defensive. Let's give some orders, shall we? Let's give some orders. Oh, there aren't any! You can't give him orders! Guess because the bloody prince. Oh, that was lovely. And my fire spirit did nothing, which was just lovely. You would have thought it would actually have the common sense to, but no, it doesn't. And he's just gonna get murdered. It seems like companions, unless they are magic using, are basically there to take a couple of hits for you, and that's really about it. Which is ultimately kind of pointless. Alright, let's beat up the archer. The funny thing is, he'll probably beat me in both melee combat, or he'll just, like, get his arrows out and attack me at close range, which is farcically hilarious. Alright. Yep, Prince Randall's dead, and I died with an arrow. Brilliant. Just bloody brilliant. You don't really have too many ways to dodge that, and I think another problem with the combat system that has, again, become obvious, thankfully, it seems like it let me reload in the right place this time, which is lovely, is that the dodge and the parry are on different weapons. You can't do both at the same time. If you could, on one weapon set, I have a feeling the combat would make a lot more sense. And the combat would be fair. But combat fairness is not a priority in this game. We are talking about a game that allows enemies to attack you when you're down and has no quick recovery or rolling option in order to avoid them, so they end up feeling extremely cheap. And with larger enemies, you're going to be taking at least half your health worth of damage. They hit you like a truck. I mean, I have like 30% armor reduction. I've got pretty good equipment for the most part. My equipment is okay. It's probably not the best, but it's pretty good. It's fairly well socketed and things like that. And I am, like, archers are taking a quarter of my health off immediately. And what can I do? Well, I can parry, but if I am currently trying to parry something in the melee combat that I'm in, and an arrow just comes through and hits me, then what am I going to do? Well, are you serious? That's what it did. Wow. My ultimate ability sucks, by the way, if you hadn't already realized that. God, this is going to be tricky. If I don't parry those arrows, I'm in serious trouble. I mean, you see, I've lost, like, 3/4 of my health already to barely any attacks at all. And the game is difficult, but it's not like Dark Souls level of difficult, because in Dark Souls, every single hit you take, you know that you've taken that because you suck. Yeah, you allowed that to happen. In this game, there's so much crap flying at you, and since you can't roll and the parry system is just so pointless and you can't interrupt enemy attacks properly and stagger them, then you end up taking damage in the most ludicrous of ways. And you know what that ends up making you do? It ends up making you use cheesy tactics in order to beat a lot of the enemies. Like, if I have a bunch of mana potions, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to kite around, I'm going to use the terrain, which sounds like, oh, that's tactical. No, I'm going to cheese them around it, because the AI is not that great. So I'm going to force the enemies just to kind of run around in circles while I pick off the stragglers. I'm going to, one boss fight, I just exploited the terrain, basically, to deflect most of his attacks. Like, I didn't even parry or anything, because I knew it wouldn't be reliable. And I try to get into a position where I can use my magic and regenerate enough magic to just kill them, and it's not a straight-up fight. It feels like I am coming up with the cheesiest possible tactics in order to win. And I hate that. You know, I like feeling like the reason that I won that combat was my combat prowess, and it never is, for the most part. The shortage of things like consumables as well really doesn't help either. I only have one health potion, and it's just like you get the resources you need in order to make this stuff from enemies, but you don't get anywhere near enough of it to regularly, god damn it, to regularly use that stuff. This fight in particular is an absolute nightmare. And you might think, oh, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong. You will encounter difficulty spikes like this throughout the entire game. Trust me, I've been playing for quite some time, and I'm certainly not the only person to complain about it. This inherently broken combat system that wants to be kind of half Dark Souls 2 and half Witcher, and Witcher 2, in fact, and it just fails to be either of those things. Okay. Don't want to use that. Does a decent amount of damage, and poisoning these guys doesn't seem to be working too well anyway. Let's increase the physical damage of this thing, so hopefully I might actually be able to use this. And let's make a few more crossbow bolts and try and go in with that. Maybe I'll have a better shot. Can I make any more exploding traps? Nope, missing refined metal. So I don't think there's even any vendors around here that I could use for that, but we'll make a bunch more crossbow bolts, which I'll probably regret because I most likely need this stuff for other things, but there we go. And we can at least try and rely on that, because I certainly don't have enough magic to make this work. And you might be thinking, well, this looks a bit like Witcher 2. You know, you're not really planning things out very well in the combat. You're not preparing properly. And I could maybe see that point, but again, even in Witcher 2, even if you didn't prepare properly, pure combat skill would get you through it, yeah? And in this case, you can't really do that because of that parry system. And it's just, it boggles my mind that such a system would even exist. It's like, it feels so silly to do that, yeah? You go down the traditional route, you say, oh, a parry? Alright, well that means he's gonna stagger and then I can counterattack and do all this kind of stuff. That makes sense. But here it's like, no, you can't do that with a parry. For God's sake, my health! Jesus. Man, I'm beating on this archer and he's still shooting at me at point blank bloody range. We might actually have a shot at beating this one. There we go, let's... Oh! God, nope, never mind. Bloody hellfire. I always have a great amount of fear when this kind of thing happens because I can foresee what the comments in the video will be. It's like, you're just bad, you're just bad. No, trust me, like, everyone has had this problem. Everybody that I have talked to, games journalists who have actually played this title, it's like, yeah, the combat system is just a mess. And unfortunately, this is primarily a combat-focused RPG. And I've talked a lot about the combat, but is it redeemed in other areas? Well, I think I actually like the setting and the storyline. I'm just going to avoid this area entirely for the moment. Maybe you can avoid it, probably not, but... The storyline is pretty good. I like the grim fantasy setting. Like, really, you feel like you're in a world where you're losing all the time, and your world is pretty much doomed, yeah? And I like that kind of doomed world scenario. I like the desperation involved in that. I think that can work really, really well. That can be a good setting. And it does that pretty well. And some of the characters you meet are quite good. but some of them aren't. It's a very, very mixed bag, and like I describe a lot of the elements of this game as mixed bag. Like, I was talking about good texture quality earlier, and yeah, the game actually does have pretty good texture qualities. You'll probably notice, like, the texture quality on the rocks and some of the enemy models, and of course the equipment models, pretty good. Yeah, they look good, but there are definitely areas that don't, like, where either the budget ran out or they just couldn't be bothered and they thought people kind of wouldn't notice. Well, I noticed. The game certainly, for the most part, looks pretty strong. It has decent lighting effects, as I said, high quality textures, good models, decent animation quality too. Although the animation quality becomes a bit pointless when you're dealing with this combat system that has no impact on the enemy. I mean, God's sake, I just unleashed fireballs on him. He doesn't care! I just hit him with a giant axe. It just passed right through and he doesn't give a damn. Even a critical hit doesn't knock him on his ass. So, it doesn't matter how good quality your animations are if your combat system looks ridiculous because the enemies aren't taking any damage from this giant axe. That's a real shame, you know. It's where mechanics cross over with presentation, and you see one impacted negatively by the other, which is a fairly rare thing to be able to comment on, but it's certainly the case here. But anyway, back to the storyline. I like the idea of conflict. So you get possessed by this demon very, very early on, and of course, you know, everyone knows that. The game's called Bound by Flame. It's kind of the idea behind it. And you're constantly arguing with him. He's a bit of a dick, but you kind of see his point, because it seems like he's the only way to save the world, but in order to do that, you've got to give in to this guy, and you're given multiple opportunities to do so, and it actually has effects on your character. Like, my glowing red eyes are as a result of me giving in to the demon a little bit, and he gave me some power in order to sort of, just as a kind of a trade for taking over more of my body. And apparently, if you keep doing that, you become, like, a fully fledged horned demon. And it even has game effects, like you can't wear helmets because you have horns on your head. And that's a rather nice level of detail. Speaking of rather nice level of details, rock textures, pretty good. Like, that is some good quality rocks they've got there. Like, the rock textures and ground textures are actually really, really nice. Gotta say, I'm pretty impressed by that for the most part. Lighting's not too bad either. Bit shiny on a lot of this stuff, I've got to say, but otherwise okay. So, you know, the storyline in general is not too shabby, and unfortunately, it's not really kept going by good side quests. I'd like to say, oh yeah, the game's also got great side quests and characters associated with it. Some of the characters are okay. There's this knight you meet fairly early on that speaks in the third person. I think he's a pretty cool character, and I also quite like the necromancer, well, not so much the necromancer, the kind of witch character that you get. I guess I'll equip this. I never use them anyway, But, unfortunately, outside of that, some of the main characters are really weak. Sybil, in particular, I think is a terrible character. She doesn't seem to have any real defining characteristics other than just being a goody two-shoes. And the problem is her script and her voice actor, terrible. The main voice actor, solid. And some of the others, also pretty good. But again, mixed bag. That it's really that thing that I'm saying over and over and over again when it comes to this game. Mixed bag, mixed bag, mixed bag. That is very much what this game is. It does pretty well in certain areas and then drops the ball in many, many others, which is, again, how I would actually characterize Spiders in general as a game developer. Good ideas, but they can't nail the whole, and they have to. It's really, really important that you make a game that hits all, and I do mean all, of those important points, and they never seem to be able to do that, which is really, really unfortunate. And hell, you know, you're playing an action RPG, you bloody well better have strong combat, and they don't. And memorable characters, again, a few of them, but mixed bag. For every really well voice-acted character that has a really funny script, and there are some of them, definitely, there are others where you're just like, what is the point of this character even being here? It's like they were made to fill a trope, you know? You've got your kind of innocent healer character who believes the best in people. You got that kind of character, then you've got your sort of sexy evil witch. You've got your warrior, honor-bound warrior, and so on and so forth. It's tropes. It's lots and lots of tropes. And it doesn't really do anything unusual, which is unfortunate. There are some side characters and quests that actually feel better fleshed out than some of the main companion characters. And you don't have that many ways to interact with your companions anyway. As you can see here, I've cheesed out the AI. But whether or not I'll even be able to do any damage here is questionable at best. For some reason, he doesn't even have his damage bar up. I'm actually... Oh, good lord. At this point, I'm not even sure how much more damage I have to do to him because his health bar disappeared. I don't know why that is. Yeah, that kick did so much, didn't it? Oh, and a successful stagger for once. Oh, his health bar came back. That's nice. Maybe I can kill him now. Yeah, have some of that. There we go. Let's craft some more bolts in battle, because it may very well be that this guy is not going to move. Yeah, so if you're hoping for a good story, it's got its moments. It does have its moments, but it's not consistent. Like, I think if they had been able to make the side characters more interesting, then they actually would be onto something really, really good here, because the idea of being possessed by a demon and having to... Oh, great, my friend came back. That was nice. Maybe he'll help me out a little bit. The idea of being possessed by this demon and wrestling with the idea of having to be further taken over by an entity that you don't trust in order to save the world, that's quite compelling. And the interactions between the main character and the demon are interesting and generally pretty well written. And then you get conversations with the side characters, which seem to have been written by a 12-year-old, and you wonder, like, what on earth? This is generic fantasy trope 101, and the voice actors can't even carry it because they're just simply not strong enough to do so. That's a real shame. The level design isn't too good either, I'm afraid. Especially, you're going to spend like the first 6-7 hours of the game in a bloody swamp, but it's not a particularly interesting swamp at that. You're going to be going through the same areas multiple times because a lot of the side quests will instantly teleport you back to the main hub, and then you have to go and, you know, pick up another. There are some which will actually allow you to get multiple quest objectives, which is always nice, but outside of that, you will be repeating the same areas over and over again with the same 3 types of respawning enemies over and over again, which gets very, very boring. And as you've noticed, the levels are not open. They're extremely maze-like, and that can be very, very frustrating. The map is not always clear because you find your way to these areas that actually have you press E to climb, and yet they're not indicated on the screen or on the map. So you end up being very confused by what looks like a path and ends up not being a path that actually leads to a dead end, and sometimes it leads to an area where you can press E and climb. Just putting a jumping button would have made more sense in, honestly. The levels aren't that large either, and particularly the hubs are often split off by doorways that hide very quick but otherwise existent loading screens. Which is not really too big a sin as far as I'm concerned, but it is a small sin nonetheless that I don't particularly like too much. So, it's unfortunately the combat that kills this game. I can kind of deal with the rest of it. I can deal with the kind of shoddy level design. I can deal with the fact that some of the characters that you interact with kind of suck. There are some really interesting decisions to be made, and you don't even realize that some of them are very permanent early on, and I like my RPGs to have that because it does increase the replayability, and it also gives player agency, which is very important. Admittedly, you are still slotted into this role regardless. You're going to be playing this mercenary archetype, whatever you decide. But you can make some pretty cool, if binary, decisions within this game. But more often than not, you don't seem like... It's hard to care. Like, making a decision that makes Sybil sad or whatever, I don't care, because Sybil is just a terrible character. She is so badly written, and she is such a sort of vapid attempt at the goody two-shoes romance interest healer girl that I find it very difficult to engage with her, and that's also very much true with a lot of the other characters, but there are certainly exceptions to that. No real doubt. Man, that's might be worth buying some potions here, actually. They cost so much, though. You don't get a lot of gold in this game, so you can sell stuff, but they don't sell for all that much, but buying some health potions would probably not go amiss, considering how much damage I'm taking. There we go. 400 gold. That was most of my reserve gone there. Ouch. Very painful. Yeah. It could have been a lot more than it was. I think it's a decent step in the right direction. But it is just so flawed in terms of its combat. And since that's what you'll be doing for 90% of the game, I can't possibly recommend it. I really can't. The stealth system is very basic. If you want to play a thief kind of character, it's more a case of sneak up and do a backstab damage, but backstabbing in combat is a lot more difficult. It's not impossible. You can do damage from behind because more often than not, your companions will attract attention for you, so that will allow you to do that kind of stuff, but if you wanted to play it as a full stealth game, you can't do that. Magic using is fine, but you burn out of mana very quickly, and your mana regeneration is quite low, so being a full-on mage is also difficult. So you are going to be forced to do this melee combat regardless, and because of parry, I've pretty much used this almost all the time. Dodge is okay, but the full-on parry and the stagger is almost required. If you come across an enemy with a shield and you're using your dual-wield weapons, unless your companion distracts them, you're going to have a tough time because you're not going to be able to do any damage from the front, and enemies will usually follow you around, so they'll keep their front facing you, so you need your companion to attract enough attention for you to be able to get behind and do damage to it. So it's almost like the game wants you to switch between the two styles, but if you do that, you can't really get your stats and your talents to be powerful enough to really deal with the enemies that kill you so fast. Even, with full pyromancy, I'm still not doing a huge amount of damage one way or the other. Yeah. Very flawed combat system. And that's kind of sad, because like I said, assets-wise, the game looks pretty damn good. It's got those nice high-resolution textures and good item models. Your equipment looks good. For the most part, the character models are good, and the animation quality is pretty good too. But a mixed bag of voice acting, a mixed bag of writing in particular, some of which is absolutely cringeworthy, and a fatally flawed combat system make this game extremely hard to recommend, especially at full price. I mean, it is a $40 title. It's even more expensive in Europe and the UK. I can't, in all good conscience, recommend it. A lot of it's been a slog. There have been enjoyable moments, but I do feel like I'm slogging through every fight. I just get depressed every time I go into combat. I really do. Like, oh great, I'm gonna be fighting again. This'll be brilliant. Will I get screwed over by a horrible combination of enemies this time? Oh. It's sad, because it could have been a lot better. But if I look on the plus side, I think that Spiders could learn a lot from this, and the next game could be a lot better. Yeah, this is a big improvement on Mars Warlogs. I think they can do a lot better than what they're doing right now. I really do believe that. And I hope that they will learn from this experience. I do. And maybe their third game will be absolutely fantastic. Here's hoping. They've clearly got the technology, and they obviously have the talent, but the experience is lacking there. And creating an action RPG with such a lousy combat system... Ugh. I'm just sad. I'm sad that happened, Very much so. Well, there's half my health gone. And somehow I didn't get my cast off. Incredible. Good lord. This fire spirit is terrible. Oh, I don't even know why I'm wasting mana on the bloody thing. Jeez. Where's my companion gone? I have no idea. Let's slowly work away at him. Chip away at his sodding health. Ugh. It's like fighting a boss in Dark Souls, but without all of the bloody tension and enjoyment. Why will you not stagger? Oh man, that interrupt stat. So incredibly silly. Alright. I think you get the point. Bound by flame, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, not what you're looking for. Prepare to die, indeed. Prepare to get frustrated, bored, and leave. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Take a look at Bound by Flame. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.